Hello, it's Tom Horn again. This video clip is my introduction to the Saudi Arabia page on my website, horne2012.com. That's HORNE 2012.com. In a roundabout way, it's about President Obama bowing to the Saudi king. In the mid-70s, the U.S. Navy sold the Saudis a navy, complete with shipyards. For all of '82 and '83, I was an engineer at the Saudi Navy's Persian Gulf shipyard on a 2-year contract. At that moment, all the Saudi sailors we dealt with had spent considerable time in the States being trained by guys who came up in shipyards and old U.S. Navy chiefs. These were real people. These Saudis had not been trained by butt-kissing diplomats or business people looking for a big payday. For that reason, we got along pretty well with the Saudi sailors, but now and then, a couple of them would make a show and vent their anger at the U.S. policy towards the Arab-Israeli conflict. Depending on the circumstance, most of us ignored it or responded fairly aggressively if there was an implied personal insult. The guys making these shows wanted some mealy-mouthed apologetic response. They wanted their asses kissed, but they really didn't expect it. For a time, I was the acting supervisor of a small engineering group, including a couple retired Navy chiefs. One day, one of our guys came back from a visit to a ship and told some of us a story he thought was funny. I wasn't there. He was a U.S. citizen about my age who had immigrated from Greece. He'd run into one of these guys bad-mouthing America and got out of the situation by saying, "I'm not American, I'm a Greek." None of the guys thought that was funny. One of them, George, was 57 years old, a retired Navy chief who'd spent 30 years in the U.S. Navy. George got really steamed about the Greek story. He apparently gave our Greek an old-school Navy chief ass-chewing. George was still steaming when I got back to the office a while later. A couple days later, I was summoned to the office of the young Saudi officer that was in command of the engineering group supplied by my company, Tracor. I knew the guy, but I didn't normally deal with him directly. We were about the same age. He told me that our Greek had come to him and complained about George treating him in a disrespectful, racist manner. This young officer went on to say that he knew all about racism in the USA, where he'd gone to college. I was thinking, shit, this guy wants some apologizing rug dance, and for me to tell him that I'd give George a hard time about this. He continued, getting irate at the memory. "Well, I was driving through a small town in Georgia and got pulled over for speeding, and the sheriff told me that I had to pay a fine, even though I had a diplomatic passport. I asked him how fast he was going. He said, about 60. I couldn't help myself. I started laughing. The picture of some arrogant 19-year-old speeding through a small Georgia town in the 70s and thinking a diplomatic passport was going to get him off was just too funny. I could almost hear the cop saying, 'That don't cut no ice around here, boy. You're in a heap of trouble.' I said, 'You're lucky he didn't throw you in jail.' His reply was, 'He did, and I had to call the embassy to get the fine paid and get released,' which made me laugh even harder. I told him that George had served in the Navy during Korea and Vietnam, and that he had seen people put their lives on the line for the United States, and that he was disgusted that our Greek had denied his citizenship just to avoid a little verbal harassment. I also told him that I thought George's comment was probably very well deserved. I can't recall his exact response, but the interview was over, and neither George or I ever heard anything more about it. The whole thing was kind of funny. So how does this apply to my Saudi Arabia page? This young officer knew that he should not have had a diplomatic passport while he was in the States at college, and that it was an abuse of our hospitality. He knew, and they all knew, that the U.S. government has long allowed this kind of abuse of our hospitality by the Saudis. Our diplomats and businessmen have trained the Saudis to expect us to kiss their asses and treat them with deference. They aren't stupid. They know that they exist only due to our protection and forbearance. In our absence, Saddam Hussein could have taken their oil-producing region in 2 weeks, and he would have. Iran could take their oil-producing region today, in a couple of months, and they would. 14 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 were young Saudis, the product of the teachings of their state-funded religion, Wahhabism, and their schools. After 9/11, they said they would change curriculum content, but they have not. The Saudis fund madrasas and mosques worldwide that teach Wahhabism, effectively the ideological basis of Al-Qaeda. We should not put up with any crap from them, but we do. How'd this happen? Why do we put up with this? One reason is that we have allowed them to very effectively purchase influence. There are American diplomats and politicians lined up to stick their noses up the asses of Saudis and other Gulf Arab royals due to the well-founded expectation that after they leave U.S. government service, they can get a well-paid, do-little retirement job funded by the Saudis or other Gulf Arab royals, or maybe be sponsored into a well-paying job on the board of a company doing business with the Gulf Arabs. First in line, guess who? Bill Clinton, making millions from smoothing the way for the U.S. and international business dealings of the Emir of Dubai and Dubai's Sovereign Wealth Fund. Close behind, Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State, who had to step aside from being the chair of the 9/11 Commission because he did not want to disclose his lobbying clients, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Arab states, who were potential targets of the investigation. The list is long, including several former ambassadors to Saudi Arabia. The longtime Saudi ambassador to the U.S., Prince Bandar, was rash enough to put it into words to the Washington Post. I quote, "If the reputation then builds that the Saudis take care of friends when they leave office, you'd be surprised how much better friends you have who are just coming into office," unquote. See my Saudi Arabia page that's up now and my Futures Lackey page for details. They can't drink the oil or defend themselves. We don't have to put up with this crap. They must sell that oil. They need oil income badly. They have a lot of money in banks all over the world, but that's to fund the Saudi royal family's escape if needed. They must have the funds to fund their current lavish lifestyle of the huge royal family. They have to continue to heavily subsidize their fast-growing population that has high and rising expectations. And they have to keep feeding the tiger they are riding, the radical Islamist Wahhabi religious establishment. And who are these desert hereditary rulers? The current king, Abdullah, is a pious, benign despot. His immediate predecessor, Fahad, was a wastrel, whore-hopping playboy till his health failed. And the king-in-waiting, Crown Prince Naif, appears to have the inclinations of a full-on despot. They appear to rule by a family consensus, but with Naif at the top, expect the consensus to change in the wrong direction. No American president should be bowing to any hereditary despot ruler, like President Obama did, bowing to the Saudi king. Or for that matter, they shouldn't be holding their hands, like President Bush did. We should be kicking their asses rather than kicking. We should be kicking their asses rather than kissing their asses. If you'd like to read my Saudi Arabia page, check out my website, horne2012.com. That's HORNE 2012.com. As always, these enlightening videos are brought to you by Jake Knife, the soon-to-be indispensable firefighter tool. See my website at jakeknife.us. That's jakeknife.us. Thank you.